The park buzzed with life. Children played, joggers passed by, and the air was filled with the chatter of families enjoying the sunny day. Among them walked Eleanor Pierce, a woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes that betrayed a life lived with purpose. Her steps were deliberate, her gaze scanning the park while her hand gripped the strap of her worn leather bag. Inside it, she carried a USB drive, one that could shatter lives and bring down a network of darkness hiding in plain sight. Eleanor noticed them before they reached her. Two men in police uniforms, their steps unnaturally heavy, their faces masked with forced smiles. She paused near a bench, her mind working quickly. She had seen this pattern before, years ago in her intelligence days. They weren't here for casual patrol. They were hunting her. "Ma'am, we'd like a word," one of the officers said, his voice laced with thinly veiled hostility. Eleanor offered a polite smile, but her body tensed. "I'm sorry, officers. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice calm but guarded. "We'd had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Mind if we ask what you're doing here?" "I'm just enjoying the park," Eleanor replied, stepping slightly back. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but she knew it would confirm their suspicions. One officer reached for her bag. "We'll need to check that." Eleanor pulled the bag closer. "I don't believe you have cause for that," she said firmly, her voice tinged with the steel of someone who had faced danger before. But her calm defiance only seemed to provoke them. Before she could react, the second officer grabbed her arm, wrenching it painfully. The crowd began to murmur, a few people pausing to watch. "Hey, let her go!" someone shouted, but no one stepped forward. "Stop resisting," the officer growled, his grip tightening. Eleanor gasped in pain, but refused to let them take her bag. The scene escalated quickly, the officers using force that was far from necessary. In the distance, a figure paused mid-step. Mike Tyson, dressed in casual sweats, had been walking through the park, enjoying a rare moment of anonymity. His sharp eyes caught the commotion, and his instincts flared. He saw the elderly woman struggling, her face a mix of fear and defiance, and the two officers manhandling her without cause. Without a second thought, Tyson strode toward them. The crowd parted as his unmistakable frame came into view. His voice boomed, commanding attention. "Hey! What the hell are you doing?" The officers froze momentarily, recognizing the man approaching them. Tyson's reputation preceded him, and his presence radiated authority. "Step back," one officer barked, but his voice lacked conviction. "You think this is okay?" Tyson's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. He moved closer, his imposing figure towering over the officers. "Let her go." The officer gripping Eleanor's arm hesitated, then sneered. "This is none of your business." "It is now," Tyson said, his tone calm but deadly. His eyes locked onto the officers, unflinching. The second officer, sensing the shift in power, released Eleanor's arm reluctantly. Eleanor, though shaken, straightened her posture. Tyson stepped between her and the officers, his body a protective barrier. "You're going to walk away," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The officers exchanged nervous glances before muttering threats under their breath and retreating. As the crowd murmured, some recording the scene on their phones, Eleanor turned to Tyson. Her voice was steady but filled with gratitude. "Thank you." Tyson nodded, his gaze following the officers until they disappeared from sight. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be fine. But they won't stop." "What's going on?" Tyson asked, his tone shifting to one of concern. He could see there was more to this encounter than met the eye. Eleanor hesitated, then gestured toward a quieter corner of the park. "Walk with me," she said. Tyson nodded, sensing the weight of what she was about to share. As they walked, Eleanor's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I have something they want," she began. "Something that could expose a network of corruption. Those officers, they're part of it." Tyson listened intently, his fists clenching as she detailed the scope of the conspiracy. By the time she finished, his face was set with determination. "You're not doing this alone," he said firmly. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised but grateful. She saw in his eyes the resolve of a fighter, someone who wouldn't back down from a challenge. "You don't know what you're getting into," she warned. Tyson smiled faintly. "I've been in a few fights before." Eleanor couldn't help but chuckle softly despite the gravity of the situation. "Then I hope you're ready for the biggest one yet." Eleanor's apartment was modest, filled with books, framed photos, and an air of quiet resilience. Tyson sat across from her, his large frame nearly dwarfing the cozy armchair. She placed the USB drive on the table between them, its plain appearance belying the weight of its contents. "This," she began, gesturing toward the small device, "is the key to exposing one of the largest human trafficking rings I've ever encountered. And it's being protected by people who swore to uphold the law." Tyson's eyes narrowed. "How did you get involved in this?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly. "I wasn't always a retired librarian. Decades ago, I worked in intelligence, covert operations, counter-surveillance. Back then, I thought I'd seen the worst humanity had to offer. I was wrong." She paused, her voice growing heavier. "After I retired, I stumbled onto this by accident. A friend of mine went missing, a woman I'd known since my days in the agency. While looking for her, I uncovered a trail, a police-backed trafficking network operating under the guise of protecting the community." Tyson leaned forward. "And the USB? It's everything," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "Names, locations, financial records. It took me years to piece it together, and I've been on the run ever since. They know I have it. That's why they came after me today." Tyson's gaze didn't waver. "Why haven't you gone to the FBI or someone higher up?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Who do you think I turned to first? Half the people I trusted turned out to be complicit. The other half were too afraid to get involved. These people, they have reach, influence, money." Her voice softened. "That's why I've been alone in this." "You're not alone anymore," Tyson said firmly. "You're right. They're powerful, but they're not untouchable." Eleanor studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes sizing him up. "Why are you helping me? You could walk away from this and never look back." Tyson exhaled slowly, his fists resting on his knees. "Because I've seen what happens when people look the other way, and I can't do that anymore." He glanced at the USB drive. "So what's the next step?" Eleanor's expression softened, gratitude flickering in her eyes. "The data on this drive is encrypted. I can crack it, but it'll take time. In the meantime, we need to stay ahead of them. Then we start tonight," Tyson said, rising to his feet. "Where do we begin?" Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. She reached into her bag, pulling out a notebook filled with scribbled notes and marked maps. "This," she said, spreading it open on the table, "is everything I have found so far. Safe houses, key players, supply routes. If we can disrupt even one part of their operation, it'll buy us time and send them a message." Tyson leaned over the map, his finger tracing a marked location. "This one. It's close, and it looks like it's a distribution point." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed. "It's low level, but it's a start." The weight of the task ahead hung heavily between them. Eleanor's years of solitude in this fight had hardened her, but Tyson's unwavering presence gave her something she hadn't felt in years: hope. For the first time, She felt like she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. "You sure you're ready for this?" Eleanor asked, her voice laced with both concern and determination. Tyson smiled faintly. "I've been ready my whole life." Night had fallen, and the city's usual hum seemed muted, as if it sensed the tension in the air. Tyson and Eleanor approached the targeted location, a nondescript warehouse tucked between abandoned buildings. It looked ordinary enough, but Eleanor's years of experience told her otherwise. "This is their distribution hub," she whispered, crouched beside Tyson behind a row of parked cars. "It won't be heavily guarded, but they'll have eyes inside." Tyson scanned the area, his sharp gaze locking onto the faint movement of shadows near the building's entrance. "Two at the door. Probably more inside." Eleanor nodded, pulling out a small handheld device. "I can jam their comms, but it'll only buy us a few minutes. You'll need to move fast." He grinned faintly. "Fast is what I do best." As Eleanor activated the jammer, Tyson moved with practiced precision. His footsteps were nearly silent as he approached the guards. The first man didn't even see him coming. A quick strike to the solar plexus followed by a sharp hook to the jaw sent him crumpling to the ground. The second turned, startled, but Tyson's fist connected before he could shout. Inside, the warehouse buzzed with low conversations and the occasional clatter of crates being moved. Tyson slipped in through a side door, his imposing frame blending into the shadows. Eleanor had stayed back, monitoring from a safe vantage point. She guided him through a discreet earpiece. "Two on your left, near the loading dock," her voice crackled softly. Tyson spotted them, one man leaning casually against a crate, the other inspecting a clipboard. He moved swiftly, taking down the first with a well-placed kick that sent him sprawling into the crate. The second barely had time to react before Tyson grabbed him, pinning him to the ground. "What's in the crates?" Tyson demanded, his voice low but menacing. The man stammered, his eyes wide with fear. I don't know. I just handle the shipments." Tyson tightened his grip. "Try again." All right, the man gasped. It's transport schedules. For the cargo." Tyson's jaw tightened. He knew what cargo meant. With one swift motion, he knocked the man unconscious and moved toward the crates. Eleanor's voice guided him again. "There's a room at the back," she said. "That's where they're likely keeping their records." Tyson made his way through the maze of crates and equipment, his movements deliberate and controlled. He reached the door and found it locked, but a single kick splintered the frame. Inside, the room was small and dimly lit, a single desk cluttered with papers and a laptop. Tyson grabbed the documents and stuffed them into a bag, then booted up the laptop. "Eleanor, I've got their records," he whispered. "Looks like shipment routes and drop points." Her voice was tense but steady. "Good. Get out now. We've stirred the hornet's nest." As if on cue, shouts erupted from the far end of the warehouse. Tyson could hear the rush of footsteps and the clatter of weapons being drawn. He moved quickly, slipping back through the side door just as armed men stormed the room he had vacated. Outside, Eleanor waited in their getaway car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Tyson slid into the passenger seat just as a burst of gunfire erupted behind them. "Go!" he barked. Eleanor didn't need to be told twice. The car roared to life, tires screeching as they sped away from the warehouse. Bullets ricocheted off the rear bumper, but they were already gaining distance. As the adrenaline began to fade, Tyson turned to Eleanor. "We've got what we need," he said, holding up the bag of documents. "But they know we're on to them now." Eleanor's eyes were sharp, her resolve unshaken. "Then we hit them harder. They've hidden in the shadows for too long. It's time to drag them into the light." Tyson nodded, a flicker of admiration in his gaze. He had seen fighters before, but Eleanor's determination was something else entirely. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every victim who had been silenced by this network. "Let's get to work," he said. The morning light filtered through the curtains as Tyson and Eleanor sat at a makeshift workstation in her apartment. The documents and data they had retrieved from the warehouse lay scattered across the table. Tyson's expression was focused, his brow furrowed as he sifted through pages of coded schedules and lists of names. Eleanor worked beside him, her fingers flying over the keys of her laptop, decrypting files with practiced ease. "They've been operating in plain sight," she said, her tone equal parts frustration and disbelief. "Using legitimate businesses as fronts. Charities, delivery services, even law enforcement. It's all interconnected." Tyson leaned back, his fists clenching. "This isn't just a small operation. This is a machine. And they've got everyone too scared or too bought off to fight back." Eleanor nodded grimly. "That's why we have to take this public. The people need to know what's happening, and they need to see the faces of the ones responsible." Tyson considered her words, then tapped the edge of a printed photo, an image of a high-ranking official with a smug smile. "This guy," he said, his voice low. "He's at the center of it." Eleanor glanced at the photo. "Chief Anderson, head of the task force assigned to combat human trafficking. Publicly, he's a hero. Privately, he's orchestrating the entire ring." Tyson's jaw tightened. "We expose him." Eleanor hesitated, her eyes scanning the screen. "It's not that simple. We need more than this to take him down. These records show his involvement, but we need undeniable proof. Something the media and public can't ignore." Tyson stood, pacing the room as he thought. "If we release what we have now, we risk tipping them off before we can get everything. But if we wait too long, they might disappear." Eleanor sighed. "We don't have to wait. We can leak just enough to start a fire. Get people asking questions, demanding answers. Then, while they're scrambling to cover their tracks, we hit them with the rest." Tyson nodded slowly. "Divide and conquer. Get the public on our side first." Eleanor smiled faintly, her admiration for Tyson's strategic mind growing. "Exactly. And we use your platform. You've got reach, Mike. People listen to you." Tyson shook his head. "This isn't about me. It's about them." He gestured to the documents on the table. "The victims. The ones who don't have a voice. That's exactly why you're the right person to do it," Eleanor said firmly. "You're not just a fighter, Mike. You're a leader." He didn't respond immediately, his gaze dropping to the files. The weight of the task ahead settled heavily on his shoulders, but he knew she was right. This wasn't a fight he could win with fists alone. It was bigger than him, bigger than either of them. By noon, Eleanor had drafted a statement, carefully worded to reveal just enough to ignite public interest without compromising their plan. Tyson recorded a video, his voice steady and deliberate as he spoke about the corruption they had uncovered. He didn't name names, but he painted a vivid picture of the network's insidious reach and its devastating impact on countless lives. Within hours of the video's release, the internet exploded. Hashtags trended, news outlets picked up the story, and communities across the country began to organize rallies and protests. Survivors of trafficking shared their stories, amplifying the message and calling for accountability. Eleanor watched the chaos unfold online, her expression a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. Tyson stood beside her, his arms crossed as he watched the news coverage on the TV. "They're panicking. You can see it in the way they're scrambling to spin the narrative." Eleanor nodded. "That's good. It means we've rattled them. But they're not going to sit back and let this happen. They'll come after us." "I'll be ready," Tyson said without hesitation. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes that spoke of unwavering determination. As the day turned to night, Eleanor received an encrypted message on her laptop. She opened it cautiously, her face hardening as she read the contents. "They've moved up their next shipment," she said. "Probably trying to relocate before we expose more." Tyson glanced at her. "Where?" Eleanor pointed to the screen. "An abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Midnight." Tyson's gaze sharpened. "Then that's where we'll be." The factory floor was alive with chaos, the low rumble of trucks idling blending with the barked orders of men scrambling to load crates. Tyson crouched behind a stack of metal barrels, his body tense as he assessed the scene. Eleanor's voice came through his earpiece, steady despite the urgency. "They're accelerating the operation," she said. "2 trucks are nearly loaded, and the third one just pulled in. This is bigger than we anticipated." Tyson scanned the area, counting at least 15 men spread across the space, some armed, others preoccupied with moving goods. "They're trying to clear out everything before they lose control. We can't let those trucks leave." "Agreed," Eleanor replied. "I've marked the drivers for you. Take them out, and I'll remotely disable the truck's ignition systems once they're stopped." Tyson moved silently, sticking to the shadows as he approached the first truck. The driver was leaning against the cab, smoking a cigarette, oblivious to the danger. With a swift, calculated motion, Tyson grabbed the man, muffling his startled cry as he incapacitated him and dragged him out of sight. "One down," Tyson murmured. Eleanor's voice came back quickly. "Good. The second driver's near the loading ramp. Be careful, he's armed." Tyson moved toward the ramp, his movements precise and controlled. He spotted the driver talking with one of the workers, a handgun holstered at his side. Timing his approach with the noise of a nearby forklift, Tyson closed the gap and struck the driver hard, rendering him unconscious before the worker could even register what had happened. Tyson grabbed the driver's gun, tucking it into his waistband. As he moved toward the third truck, shouts erupted from across the factory floor. Tyson's presence had been noticed, and the workers were scrambling to respond. The third driver, alerted to the commotion, climbed into the cab and started the engine. "Eleanor, he's making a run for it," Tyson said sharply. "Not for long," she replied. A second later, the truck sputtered and stalled as Eleanor's hack took effect. The driver cursed and jumped out, but Tyson was already there, subduing him with a swift combination of punches. With all 3 trucks neutralized, the focus shifted to the remaining workers and guards. Tyson took down several more with a combination of brute force and strategic strikes, his movements a blur of efficiency. Still, the numbers were overwhelming, and the guards began to regroup, shouting orders and drawing their weapons. "Mike, you've got more reinforcements coming in from the east side," Eleanor warned. Tyson gritted his teeth, positioning himself behind a stack of crates for cover. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the approaching guards, their voices growing louder. His mind worked quickly, formulating a plan. Spotting a control panel on the wall, Tyson sprinted toward it, dodging gunfire as the guards opened fire. He reached the panel and slammed his fist into the emergency stop button, cutting power to the conveyor belts and machinery. The sudden silence disoriented the guards, giving Tyson the opening he needed to counterattack. He moved like a force of nature, taking down one guard after another. Each strike was precise, each movement deliberate. The remaining workers, realizing they were no match for him, began to retreat, leaving the guards to fend for themselves. "Eleanor, what's the status on the trucks?" Tyson asked as he dispatched the last guard. "All 3 are secure," she replied. "But we've got company. Police scanners are picking up reports of backup units headed your way. You need to get out now." Tyson scanned the factory floor, his eyes landing on a small office tucked in the corner. Not yet. There's an office here. If they're keeping records on site, that's where they'll be. Be quick, Eleanor urged. Tyson entered the office, his eyes immediately locking onto a desk cluttered with paperwork and a laptop. He grabbed the files and powered up the laptop, quickly searching for anything useful. Within moments, he found what he was looking for: digital records of shipments, payment logs, and correspondence linking the operation to higher-ups. I've got everything, Tyson said, stuffing the files into his bag and transferring the digital data to a USB drive. He shut the laptop down and exited the office just as the distant wail of sirens reached his ears. Mike, you've got less than 2 minutes before they're here, Eleanor said urgently. Tyson moved swiftly, weaving through the remnants of the chaos he had created. He exited the factory and made his way to their getaway car, where Eleanor was waiting, her fingers flying over her laptop as she monitored the incoming police units. As Tyson slid into the passenger seat, Eleanor hit the gas, the car peeling away from the factory just as the first police vehicles arrived. They drove in silence for several minutes, the adrenaline of the mission still coursing through them. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice tinged with both relief and determination. This is it, Mike. This is the proof we need to take them down. Tyson nodded, his expression resolute. Then let's make it count. The safe house was quiet, except for the occasional hum of Eleanor's laptop as it decrypted the files retrieved from the truck. Tyson paced the room, his energy barely contained. The confrontation at the factory had left its mark, not just physically, but in the grim reality of what they had uncovered. The evidence was damning: photographs, financial transactions, transportation logs. The network was bigger than either of them had imagined. Eleanor looked up from her screen, her expression weary but resolute. This ties everything together. Raines wasn't bluffing about the scale of this operation. They've been trafficking people across multiple states for years, using police and corporate assets to cover their tracks. Tyson stopped pacing and leaned over the table. What about Anderson? Does this put him directly in the crosshairs? Eleanor nodded, her fingers tapping a few keys to bring up a file. It's all here. Payments, communication logs, and even a meeting schedule with some of the key players. He's not just complicit, he's orchestrating the whole thing. Tyson's jaw tightened. Then we move now. Eleanor hesitated, her voice steady but tinged with caution. Mike, this isn't like the factory or the warehouse. Anderson's in a different league. He's got resources, connections, and people willing to kill to protect him. Tyson met her gaze, his voice firm. And we've got the truth. That's more dangerous than anything he's got. Eleanor couldn't argue with that. She turned back to her laptop, initiating a secure transfer of the files to multiple trusted outlets, including independent journalists and advocacy organizations. If we release this now, it'll blow the lid off the entire operation. But it also puts a target on our backs. Anderson won't go down quietly. Tyson crossed his arms, his expression unwavering. Let him come. He needs to answer for what he's done. A beep from the laptop interrupted their conversation. Eleanor's eyes widened as she read the screen. It's Anderson. He's on the move. There's a meeting happening tonight, likely a last-ditch effort to regroup after what we disrupted. Tyson leaned closer. Where? A private estate on the outskirts of the city. High security. It's where they finalize their deals. Tyson's voice was like steel. Then that's where we end this. As the evening descended, Tyson and Eleanor prepared for what they both knew would be their final confrontation. Eleanor packed the remaining files and ensured multiple backups were uploaded to secure locations. Tyson checked the gear they had salvaged, his hands steady despite the gravity of what lay ahead. You don't have to go in, Eleanor said quietly. You've done more than enough already. Tyson shook his head. This isn't about doing enough. This is about finishing what we started. Eleanor offered a faint smile. Then let's make sure it counts. They arrived near the estate under the cover of darkness, the sprawling property lit with floodlights and patrolled by armed guards. Eleanor remained in the car, monitoring the security feeds she had hacked into moments earlier. Tyson moved with purpose, bypassing the outer defenses with the precision of someone who had faced high-stakes challenges his entire life. Inside the estate, the atmosphere was tense. Anderson stood at the head of a long table, surrounded by his inner circle. The men and women present weren't just criminals. They were powerful figures in politics, business, and law enforcement. Their conversation was sharp, filled with plans to discredit the evidence and eliminate any threats to their operation. Anderson's voice was cold as he addressed the group. We've dealt with situations like this before. A couple of loose ends won't stop us. We've got too much at stake. Before anyone could respond, the room's doors burst open. Tyson stepped inside, his presence commanding immediate attention. The guards moved to intercept him, but he was faster, taking them down with a flurry of precise, devastating blows. The room erupted into chaos as Anderson's associates scrambled for cover. Tyson's focus was singular, Anderson. He moved toward the man with unrelenting determination, his steps echoing in the now silent room. Anderson's facade of control cracked as Tyson reached him, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. It's over, Tyson growled, his voice low and dangerous. You've hurt enough people. Anderson sneered, though his bravado was fading. You think this changes anything? There's always someone else to take my place. Tyson's grip tightened. Not if I have anything to say about it. Before Anderson could respond, Eleanor's voice came through the earpiece Tyson wore. Mike, it's done. The files are live. Everyone knows. Tyson released Anderson, letting him collapse to the ground. You're not walking out of here, Tyson said, his voice cold. Not this time. Moments later, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Eleanor had tipped off federal authorities, ensuring that Anderson and his associates wouldn't escape justice. Tyson stepped back as law enforcement stormed the estate, their focus immediately turning to the figures cowering in the room. As Anderson was dragged away in handcuffs, he shot a venomous glare at Tyson. But Tyson's expression didn't waver. He had done what needed to be done. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Eleanor met him outside, her face a mixture of relief and exhaustion. You did it, she said quietly. Tyson shook his head. We did it. The sun rose on a city that was finally beginning to confront its darkest truths. News outlets buzzed with coverage of the arrests at the estate. Images of Anderson in handcuffs, his once pristine reputation shattered, dominated every channel. The files Eleanor had uploaded spread like wildfire, triggering an outpouring of public outrage and demands for systemic change. Eleanor sat in a modest conference room, speaking into a camera that streamed live to millions. Her voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed the weight of her journey. For too long, this network thrived in the shadows, preying on the most vulnerable while those in power turned a blind eye. Today, we begin the work of ensuring it never happens again. Her words were met with applause from the small crowd gathered, a mix of journalists, survivors, and advocates. Tyson stood in the back, silent but present, his arms crossed as he watched Eleanor's courage ripple outwards. After the conference, Eleanor joined Tyson outside. We've lit the spark, she said, her voice quieter now. But this is just the beginning. The system they built didn't crumble overnight. Tyson nodded. Then we keep fighting. For them. He gestured toward a group of survivors who had gathered nearby, some smiling tentatively, others still visibly shaken. Among them was a young woman clutching a handwritten note, a thank-you letter she insisted on giving to Eleanor. Eleanor accepted it with a gentle smile. "For them," she echoed. Over the following weeks, the fallout from the exposure continued to grow. Investigations expanded, leading to more arrests and uncovering deeper layers of corruption. Advocacy groups rallied to provide support for survivors, offering legal aid, counseling, and resources to rebuild their lives. Tyson, true to his word, remained at the forefront of the movement. His platform became a beacon, drawing attention to the ongoing fight for justice. He used his influence to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced, partnering with organizations that worked tirelessly to dismantle trafficking networks. Eleanor, meanwhile, focused on mentorship. She started a foundation in her late friend's name, dedicated to training individuals in identifying and combating human trafficking. Her lectures, filled with both technical knowledge and heartfelt conviction, inspired a new generation of advocates determined to continue her work. One evening, as Tyson and Eleanor sat in her living room, the glow of the television illuminating their tired faces, a new segment caught their attention. It featured a young girl, barely a teenager, standing at a podium during a community rally. "She's one of the survivors from the safe house," Eleanor said softly. The girl's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she spoke about her experience and her determination to help others like her. Tyson watched in silence, his expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "That's why we do this," he said finally. "So they can have a voice." Eleanor nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's their fight now, too." As the months passed, the cultural shift they had fought so hard to ignite began to take hold. Communities grew more vigilant, law enforcement agencies implemented stricter oversight, and new legislation aimed at dismantling trafficking networks gained bipartisan support. It wasn't a perfect solution. There were still battles to fight, but progress was undeniable. Eleanor and Tyson became reluctant symbols of the movement, their stories serving as a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing up against injustice. For Eleanor, it was a chance to reclaim her legacy, not as a retired spy, but as a woman who refused to let evil win. For Tyson, it was a transformation, from a fighter defined by his strength to a leader defined by his heart. Years later, at the dedication ceremony for a new safe house, Eleanor stood before a crowd, her hair now fully gray but her spirit undimmed. Tyson stood beside her, his presence still commanding but softened by time. The plaque they unveiled bore the names of countless survivors, a permanent reminder of why their fight mattered. As the crowd dispersed, a young woman approached them, her eyes bright with determination. "You don't know me," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "but I was one of the people you saved. And now I'm studying to become a lawyer. I want to keep fighting." Eleanor smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Then you already are." Tyson placed a hand on the woman's shoulder, his voice warm. "Keep going. The world needs more people like you." As the woman walked away, Eleanor turned to Tyson, her expression thoughtful. "You think we've done enough?" Tyson shook his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Not enough. Just what we could." The two of them stood there for a moment, watching as the next generation stepped forward to carry the torch. They didn't need words to express what they both knew. The fight wasn't over, but it was in good hands. Together, they had started something that would outlive them, a legacy built not on strength or strategy, but on the unwavering belief that justice could prevail.